What is it?
The main thing I got from it was like this sense of feeling seen and validated.
Well, why does it have to be this way?
This book was placed in my hand for this moment.
Insightful, learned a lot, wrote some quotes that I'm ready to like paint on my wall.
I love this book!
That we just kind of pull out some of the big themes that we see and talk about a few different ones.
I apologize if most of my contribution has K-pop references.
Alternative book title, The Feminine Mystique Part 2. You were really just gay all along. Welcome to Book Club.
With Julia.
And Victoria.
We are two lifelong friends who read a book and talk about it each episode.
This is a podcast where we explore new perspectives and use books as a tool for personal and community growth.
This week we are reading Leave It To Psmith by P.G. Wodehouse, a lighthearted novel from 1923 in which a young Englishman with a ridiculous name pretends to be a poet to get a job at a castle where he throws a lot of flower pots, solves a mystery, and falls in love.
So this is such a wonderful way to start back up with the book club. I feel like it was a good, lighthearted novel to like get us back at it.
Yeah.
Reading and discussing, and this is the first time that we're recording with Julia in Belgium. So
it is.
If I sound a little tired, it's because I'm actually getting to record in the morning, which is pretty good for me, honestly. I tend to do better in the mornings, but we had to record on a Saturday morning because I had a mishap with my calendar. So it's a little early on the weekend for me.
Yeah. One of the few good things coming out of us not being able to live together anymore, we get to record in our ideal times of day because of the time
really
difference.
Great.
So I'm recording in the afternoon and she's recording in the morning, and it all works out great.
Yeah. If you have not read Leave It To Psmith, and you care about spoilers, this is your official warning that we will be talking about the entire book. But if you haven't read the book and you want to listen in anyways, you're totally welcome.
Absolutely.
So, Julia, you were the one that advocated to get this on our reading lists. Mm-hmm. So what was your experience reading this book?
Yeah, I got it for my mom first, not actually for myself. Though I knew if I got it for my mom, I would get to read it. But I had never heard of it before. But one of my writing professors in college had recommended Wodehouse as like a charming and safe and very English and a kind of escape from, if you were having writer's block or you were really exhausted from heavy reading or something, she called it going back to the Wodehouse, which in my mind conjured like a wheelhouse or some other type of house. And so I thought it was a type of house until I looked him up. And then we were in Chicago in that indie bookstore in Oak Park, and I saw it and I was like, oh, this is perfect for my mom. I'm going to get her that for Christmas, and then I'll get to give it a try. And everything from the back cover, like everything about the book made me think that it was going to be a satire about upper class people in England. And it kind of is, but I was expecting more scathing kind of ridicule and mockery. And what I ended up with was like, the thing that threw me for a loop was the love story. Psmith, he falls in love. He has a love interest and they're like happy at the end. And it's like genuine. And it really threw me for a loop. I was really confused. I was like, what kind of book am I reading here? What is this? I feel lied to. And then by the end, I was like, wow, this was so delightful and heartwarming in a way I was not expecting. It was like a sneak attack of affection and charm. I think it was a lot of fun, very lighthearted. And I haven't read any of his books since, but now my mom is like obsessed with them and she's been reading them a lot during COVID. She just reads them over and over and over again. So I won lots of daughter points with this book and I want that on the record. But how about you? You had a slightly different experience with this one.
So I was interested when you recommended to put it on the reading list for the podcast, just because it's a little different. You know, I like having some lighthearted novels thrown in with a lot of the sad and serious books that we sometimes gravitate towards. So I did enjoy it at the end of the day, but I almost didn't finish reading the book. Which is a lot to say because I typically always do for the podcast. Because I got to chapter 6 where the title is Lord Emsworth Meets a Poet, and I nearly threw the book across the room. I was so uncomfortable because dramatic irony makes my skin crawl. And I'm just embarrassed and uncomfortable for all the characters involved. I know it's fictional. Like, these aren't actual real people this is happening to. Mm-hmm. But whether it's TV or movies or even watching something unfold in real life, like, I hate those tropes of someone trying to be someone else and the mistaken identity and like, oh, haha, all the comedy of errors that ensues. And it's like my least favorite kind of dramatic irony because I'm just like, everyone needs to communicate more. We would understand. Like, don't pretend to be someone you're not. It's going to backfire. And like, we know that Eve thinks the McTodd is like this really awful poet. Not because he's a bad writer, but because he was like really bad to his wife, which is like Eve's friend. And so you know that Psmith wants to be with Eve, and so he's gonna like follow her, and so then he pretends to be the poet because he doesn't know that Eve thinks the poet's an awful person, and I'm just like, it's gonna blow up, I can't handle this. So Julia gave me a pep talk. And I told her, I'm like, I don't know if I can read this book. Like, it stressed me out, and I like, you know, my lighthearted novels to be good pre-bedtime reading, but it was not doing it for me. But she assured me it all works out in the end. Like, it's like a Shakespearean comedy. Like, everyone's gonna be happy, and except for maybe there's like some foolish character that might, you know, get their comeuppance. So I was like, okay, I can power through. And then I really enjoyed it. I think with that promise that like there is a happy ending, that I was like, I can overcome that. Yeah, it was interesting read altogether. I did like the little bit of mystery to it. I think there was some good twists. Again, I'm a pretty gullible reader, but I found some of the twists like, oh, I didn't see that coming. Like, I thought Miss Peavy was a little strange, but now we're like, aha, she's pretending to be someone too. So that was fun. And like Wodehouse's writing is just so fun, and the comic voice of his narrator is just amazing.
So speaking of Wodehouse, tell us a bit about him.
Yeah, we'll just do a little overview of Wodehouse. So, P.G. Wodehouse, his full name is Sir Pelham Grenville Wodehouse.
Oh my god, that's the poshest name I've ever heard in my life.
Pelham? What? He was born in 1881 in England and then died in 1975 in New York. So, he was a comic novelist, a short story writer, a lyricist and playwright. He's best known for creating the character of Jeeves, who is not in this book, but is known as kind of like the gentleman's gentleman kind of trope, which I found interesting because I'm like, oh, I even know what this trope of Jeeves is, and I haven't read his books about that character. But he wrote a ton, more than 90 books, more than 20 film scripts. And he also, I found interesting, he would help write and collaborate on plays and musicals. So he worked on 30 different shows. One bit I found interesting, I don't really know if it ties in at all to our discussion of the book today, but he moved to the U.S. and spent some time living in France pre-World War II, but he was eventually captured in France by the Germans, and then he spent much of the war interned in Berlin. He was working for several, like, publications, including newspapers. I don't know if that's why he was, like, captured. I don't really know. He, kind of built some animosity, though, between his home country, because he, in 1941, made different radio broadcasts from Berlin broadcasting to the U.S., where he used humor to describe his experience as a prisoner and to, like, kind of use a subtle, like, ridicule of his captors. But since he was using, like, the enemy broadcasting facilities, the British, who were under siege at the time, were like, this is not tasteful. We don't like you right now. Which, I don't know. I don't know the details. I didn't listen to the broadcast, but it's like he's using his comedy, like what he knows with, almost maybe to cope with the situation, but his home country's like, we don't want to hear from you that you're doing all right, I guess. So Wodehouse, after the war, he settled in the U.S. and became a citizen, though I think things smoothed over with with Britain over time because he was knighted right before he passed in 1975. So, like I said, he's a very prolific author of the Psmith publications. This was originally so the character of Psmith appears in multiple of Wodehouse's books. I believe Leave It To Psmith is the last one that he wrote with this character. And it originally was serialized in the Saturday Evening Post in the US and the Grand magazine in the UK. That kind of gave me some insight on like kind of the structure of how it's written, because it has these like longer chapters, but there's like smaller chapters within them. So I don't know like at what extent it was serialized, if each of those smaller chapters that came out each week or whatever. So that was interesting. But the ending of the magazine version is actually different from the ending of the book. I don't know how, but it is. I haven't read the magazine version to know. So that's a little bit about Wodehouse and Psmith.
All right, well, I'm going to give a quick summary so we can get into it. So, Psmith, our main character, our title character, is trying to find work. In his words, any reasonably salaried position that has nothing to do with fish. Which I'm guessing, now that I know that this is the last book with him in it, I'm guessing is a joke that you would get more if you had read the earlier books. He probably ran into some troubles with some fish. But it's still funny anyway. So he adds the silent P to the front of his name to make him sound distinguished. Technically his name is Smith, but he puts a silent P in front of it, like pterodactyl or something, or psychology, right? Because you think it makes him seem fancy. But it's such a ridiculous name that I want to pronounce it, because otherwise, Leave It To Psmith, that's not funny.
Right.
It's funnier on the page, I think. He also, before the action begins, he meets Eve Halliday. She's like standing in the rain on the street, and he gives her someone else's umbrella. He just steals a man's umbrella and is like, here. And so that's how the main love story starts. And then they both separately get picked up in different ways for job postings at this place called Blandings Castle. Eve is there to catalog the library, and Psmith is there to help the oldest son of the Earl. So the oldest son is named Freddie. Freddie hires him to steal his aunt's necklace because Freddie likes a bit of gambling. He's a little short on funds at the moment, so he's trying to steal his aunt's necklace. And so Psmith comes in pretending to be a poet who's being expected at the castle, and there's a lot of mistaken identity and misunderstandings around this particular necklace. There's a bit of a 3-card Monty where the necklace is in various flower pots. There's a lot of flower pots in this story. Psmith and Eve end up falling in love, and then somehow everything is magically resolved at the end with everyone happy, except the closest thing this book has to a villain, which is this guy called the Efficient Baxter. Efficient is not part of his name. Wodehouse gives him that epithet every single time he says his name because, I don't know, because it's funny. And Baxter is so efficient that he just like doesn't know how to have any fun. And so he's like the villain. And he's eternally frustrated with Psmith.
But even he gets, a job he gets another job at the end of it. That seems to be a step up for him. So
yeah.
Even he ends up not as terribly.
Honestly, everything's fine. And like there should be more consequences than there are to everyone's actions. Right. But there are 0.
And more injuries.
True.
There's a lot of physical comedy that is like, that should just break a bone or give a concussion. But everyone just like pops back up and like, oh, it's fine that you dropped my entire heavy suitcase on my head or threw a flower pot at me while I was sleeping.
Yeah. Baxter falls down the stairs quite a ways. It's not good. It's not good for you. Yeah. So yeah, that's the book. Before we get into it though, we're going to play for you a recording that I did with my mom before I left for Belgium. We really wanted to have her on as a guest, but she's a teacher. Timing doesn't really work out. So we thought I'd record a little interview with her before I left so that she could share some of her thoughts, because honestly, she's the biggest Wodehouse fan now. And so I wanted to get some of her thoughts, and then we'll come back and share ours after this. So here is me talking to my mother. So since we're going to be talking about Leave It To Psmith. There was no one else I wanted to have on the show besides my own mother, Beth Clausen. She took some convincing. She doesn't like public speaking, but she has graciously agreed to do a small interview to talk about one of our favorite authors, I would say now. My mom is a school teacher, which should surprise no one. She's the one who taught me how to write when I was homeschooled as a child. She was also an English major and sort of makes it her personal mission to help every single child find a book that they love to read. Myself and my brother were no exceptions. I think we had very different taste, so it was a bit of a struggle at first. But it worked out, and what we figured out is that we both love quaint English novels. Is one of our overlapping interests. So lots of Jane Austen, lots of Agatha Christie. And so when I had first heard of Wodehouse, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to get this for my mom. She's going to love it. And I got it for her for Christmas, and she's been reading it voraciously ever since. So what was your experience reading this book?
Well, as Julia said, she got me the book, I say Leave It To Psmith. She says Leave It To Psmith. Anyway, the P is silent. She got it for me as a Christmas gift, and I had heard of Wodehouse, especially his Wooster and Jeeves novels, but I had never read any of his works. Anyway, so I started reading it, and I was just blown away by how funny it was. I laughed out loud, and also the writing is so amazing, and the characters are so ridiculous but delightful at the same time.
Yeah, I know. I have my list right here. My mom is giving me prompts. I have an outline. I know what I'm going to ask you. So you obviously loved it. What more specifically did you like about it?
Well, I tend to like books for the characters, whether it's I'm reading history, mystery, whatever. I really get drawn in by the characters. And as I said, the characters in this book are just so much fun. The title character, P. Smith, is this pretentious young man who grew up with the name Smith, but decides he's going to add the P to his name, even though it's silent, just so he can appear more distinguished. And he wears a monocle, and he's always in his best suit. But even though he's so pretentious, he's still very good-natured and so likable. The book takes place, Wodehouse has a whole series of books that take place at Blandings Castle. And the Earl of Blandings is an elderly gentleman, Lord Emsworth, who Wodehouse describes as being very fluffy-headed. He's extremely absent-minded, always is getting confused when people tell him something. He gets it totally mixed up. If you ask him to do something, he'll do the opposite. And the book opens with Lord Emsworth trying to find his glasses, asking everyone to look for them. All of his servants are going all over the house looking for them. And his secretary comes in, who is Baxter, and is described as being very, very efficient. Right away notices that they're hanging around his neck. But it's just a fun book.
Is that everything you liked about the book? Yeah, that's everything you wrote down. Well, you gave a summary. You didn't necessarily say what you liked. Okay. It's very funny to me recording this conversation with you because you're using your teacher voice. And oh, now you're going to get in your head about it. I like your teacher voice, but it's very official. People are listening to what I have to say voice. Oh, okay. Got it. So you went on a Wodehouse kick this summer, some light summer reading. You tore through like 5 books since I've been here, at least, if not more. So, how did this book do when you reread it?
Well, I enjoyed it the second time, but I would have to say that it was a really different experience because it wasn't my first Wodehouse novel. The first time I was just enthralled and amazed by how good it was. Like Julia said, in between the first reading and the second reading, I read several other books, and one of them was a book that Julia also gave me for a different Christmas, I believe. It's called A Bounty of Blandings, and it's a set of 3 novels, Blandings Castle, Summer Lightning, and Heavy Weather. And I think I loved these books even more than Psmith, Leave It to Psmith. For the most part, these 3 books all take place at Blandings, not so much in London. And I just love books that take place in the English countryside. They also take place in Market Blandings, which is the little town nearby the estate. And it's just a very charming setting. The books include a lot of the same characters that you meet in Leave It to Psmith. And they add this brother of Lord Emsworth, whose name is Galahad or Gally, and he's lived a very wild life. When he was young, he was in love with a girl. She might have been like a chorus girl. And of course, the family, she was totally unsuitable. And so they sent him away to Italy or someplace. And so then the rest of his life, he was just heartbroken. And so he just lived this really wild life. Well, anyway, now he's about to write this book of his memoirs. And all of the upper class in England, upper class British society, are scared to death of what he's going to write about, and that they're going to include themselves in this book, different escapades that they were involved in with Galahad. And so throughout the book, you have people hiring detectives to go steal the book, or they themselves come to Blandings in disguise to steal the book. So you have all that going on. And then another part of the plot deals with Lord Emsworth's beloved pig, that he has named this pig the Empress of Blandings. And this pig is huge and has won the large pig contest at the local fair 2 years in a row. And Lord Emsworth spends hours just standing by the pig, watching it eat, watching it sleep. It's his one true love. And he's always worried that someone is going to steal the pig, which does happen. There are incidents where the pig ends up in a bathroom, a car. People are steal the pig to try to get what they want from Lord Emsworth, because he is the one who controls the money as the Earl of the estate. But I loved how Wodehouse, so you've got all of this intrigue going on, and at the very end of these 3 novels, the 2 plots are joined together in this really funny, amazing way. And so the ending is just so satisfying.
Yeah, that's something I noticed with Psmith, is that there's all these different, really complicated, chaotic plot lines that you're just like, how is he going to resolve them individually? And then he ends up resolving all of them at the same time in like one single stroke. And it's amazing. It's really impressive writing that he's able to tie everything all together. So the fact that seems like a hallmark of his writing is very cool. So yeah, what are some of the like overarching themes or characters or style or whatever that you kind of notice? Because you've read significantly more Wodehouse than I have.
Well, like you said, every book is a comedy of errors. You've got all this mistaken identity and mix-ups. You've got Lord Emsworth worried about his pig, misunderstanding what everyone's saying to him. Also, in all of the books, you have several of Lord Emsworth's snobbish sisters, and I was noticing how in every book they add another one. I think the last book I read, now there's 4 sisters. They're all pretty similar, and everyone is deathly afraid of these sisters. And then you also always have a niece or a nephew of Lord Emsworth or his own son, Frederick, who want to marry, but invariably the person they want to marry is considered unsuitable by the aunts. And they're trying to get their money so that they can marry from Lord Emsworth, but the aunts are in the way. So then you have people coming up with these plans on how to get the money, like maybe by stealing the pig and then restoring the pig to Lord Emsworth. So he'll be so happy that he'll give them the money. Or coming to Blandings as another person. But with all of it, as Julia said, the great thing is that just like in a Shakespeare comedy, everything is sorted out and the story ends happily. And for me, during this time, during COVID, these are just perfect books to read. It just helps lift my spirits and get my mind off of current events. And I just really enjoy going to Blandings Castle and laughing.
Yeah. Good old-fashioned escapism. We love that. Yeah, I would agree. I feel like Agatha Christie too. I feel like Agatha Christie and Wodehouse do something similar for me, where I read it and you feel so safe and you just kind of run away for an afternoon to some quaint little village. So they feel very cozy, it's not, American novels, it's all about the vastness of the Midwest or the like crowdedness of the city, like everything's so big. And you read a little English novel and it's like there are 25 people in this town and there's little tiny fences and little tiny sheep and little tiny problems. It's very, very comforting. You dug up a quote that he has about his own writing, which I think we both thought was very interesting and explains a lot about him, where he says, "I believe there are only two ways of writing a novel. One is mine, making the thing a sort of musical comedy without music and ignoring real life altogether. The other is going right down deep into life and not caring a damn." And I love the description of writing a musical without the music, because it's kind of perfect, because a musical is like this kind of alternate reality where everything is, I don't know, heightened, I guess, but it wraps up so cleanly and it kind of feels nice. So, something we always do on the show is at the end we say, okay, if you liked this book, what's some other books that you might want to read next? So, what would you recommend to people who like this book?
I would definitely recommend the books by James Herriot. He was the country vet in Northern England in the early part of the 20th century. His books are not always as lighthearted, but they're just beautifully written, and you've got these wonderful small town characters, the farmers, the pet owners, and it just warms your heart. Sometimes you're crying, sometimes you're laughing out loud, but it's just always a wonderful experience. And he's an amazing writer. And actually, I read that he loved Wodehouse and actually studied Wodehouse's style of writing and tried to imitate it. So I thought that was interesting. But anyway, I've been reading his books during this time as well, and I've really enjoyed them.
Yeah, there's also a TV show, right? Which you were saying we should watch, and we haven't watched it together yet. We need to do that before I go. So, thanks so much for coming on. It's delightful. Thanks for sharing these books with me.
It was fun to do it with you, Julia.
This podcast is made possible by our fantastic book club members. You can support the show by becoming a member on buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv. Starting at $3 per month, book club members can connect with fellow listeners, help us select books for future episodes, unlock exclusive posts and messages, get early and discounted access to future events, and more. And if you want to take your support to the next level, you can join the TISM tier, which starts at $5 per month. The TISM tier is all about autism. Are you an autistic person looking for community? A possible neurodiverse person looking for resources? Or an ally hoping to learn more from an actually autistic person? Members of this tier get free access to Julia's autism-related articles on Medium. The best part of any book club, besides the books, is the community. So join us in our growing community of book nerds by becoming a member of the book club today. Follow the link in our show notes or go to buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv to join the party. That's buymeacoffee.com/bookclubwithjv. We'll see you there.
Well, that was great.
Oh, that was so fun. I love listening to you chat with your mom. But it was so fun to hear your mom's perspective. And I'm also now wanting to read the other Wodehouse books that she spoke so highly of, considering I did enjoy Leave It To Psmith. So there's others out there. That's awesome.
Yes, there are so many.
So one thing that I thought would be fun to like chat about in response to what your mom said, like these were books for her that kind of like have helped her get through the pandemic. Just like that escapism of listening to something, or sorry, reading something or listening, I guess, if it's an audiobook, that's so far removed and just fun and lighthearted, and knowing that there's not going to be serious consequences for anything that happens in the book. I wanted to talk about why we find these books so comforting. Specifically Leave It To Psmith, but kind of anything within this realm of Wodehouse's work.
Even you, right, who like was made deeply uncomfortable by the dramatic irony, were calmed down and were able to like, find it comforting and soothing by the end, because I told you everything will be perfect. The ending will work out perfectly. It's like almost magical, right? And I find that very telling, that like no matter how chaotic it gets, no matter how many wild choices people make, mistakes are made, people are just being dumb, right? And completely misunderstanding each other, it all ties together perfectly in like a little bow. And maybe that it feels like an alternate reality in a way, because none of life works like that. Or maybe it's that kind of feeling of like, it's all gonna be okay. Like you're in the middle of something really chaotic right now and you don't know how it's gonna resolve itself. But, you're gonna be all right.
Yeah, so I think Wodehouse's book and books, I guess, can really fit that like comfort factor for many people. For me, maybe it's a little too uncomfortable for always being comfortable. A escapism book, though I do find it fun. I think for me, I find a similar kind of comfort in romances. I actually just finished reading Take a Hit, Dani Brown, and in it, one of the characters talks about why they really like romance novels and how the promise of a happy ending kind of helped them get through a really difficult time. And I just really like the way that character that Talia Hilbert wrote phrased it, of like, you're right, it's not necessarily about like wishing my life was different or wishing I was like living these like highly dramatized or very like perfect kind of romances that all end with like a happily ever after. It's more just like the promise as I read, knowing like everything's gonna work out. Like they're gonna have difficulties, there's gonna be miscommunication. Though I will admit my favorite romance novels are not the ones that include them just like not communicating with each other and then like, we shouldn't be together because like someone misunderstood someone. I'm like, oh my goodness, just talk. But I do enjoy those romance novels for that kind of like, okay, I need a break from the other things I'm reading. I need a break from what's happening in the world or what's happening in my life if things are a little stressful with like work or something. So it's a nice little escape. I guess I have another one, but I'll let you go if you have any kind of genres or types of book that you find particularly comforting.
Yeah, for me it's murder mysteries. Isn't that wild that books about murder have become a comfort genre for people? That's like that's very, very strange. But yeah, blame Agatha Christie, because again, it's that sense of a predictable pattern, right? So like the books start with something horrible happening, and then all this conflict gets uncovered, and then the murderer is always caught at the end, which does not really mimic real life. But the bad guy is always caught and punished at the end of the murder investigation. And the fact that they're structured as a kind of puzzle, right? And so you get these little pieces and it slowly fits all together until you see the complete picture and there's a big reveal. So there's always resolution. And I think also the predictability of it is something I, as an autistic person, can, I think, seek out more deliberately than maybe a neurotypical person. But repeating patterns, repeating phrases, watching the same films over and over again, like knowing what's going to happen and knowing how it makes you feel and repeating that thing over and over again is a soothing technique, right? Autistic people use it maybe more deliberately and more openly, but like this is a human thing that everyone does where like, the world is very chaotic and unpredictable, but we try and find something, like as my mom said, like almost every Wodehouse novel has basically the same plot and you come back to it because of that, it doesn't get boring. It's comforting to be like, yes, we're back here. I know this pattern. Yeah, it makes sense to me.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've actually like sat and read one or even watched a performance of it. But talking about dramatic irony as well as like things that we find comforting, I think of like Shakespearean comedies, whereas I'm not one to typically reread anything unless it's been maybe years or we're going to talk about it on the podcast, so I need a refresher. Then I'll do a second read. But the one exception is many Shakespeare plays, specifically Twelfth Night, is a comedy that I loved when I read for the first time in high school and saw it performed, and I was obsessed with She's the Man because it's like a, the Amanda Bynes adaptation into like present day. Though it's so silly and like you would think the tropes of the mistaken identity, the dramatic irony would really get to me. And sometimes it does. I'm sure the first time I watched She's the Man, I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, that movie's hard
so
for me.
Uncomfortable. But because I'm familiar with the plot and I understand what's happening and I find the characters so fun and interesting, and especially in like the original language of it, not the adapted modern day version, just Shakespeare's humor and use of like the English language to tell this ridiculous story, I absolutely love. And you get the promise of a Shakespearean comedy that everyone that you care about is going to end up married at the end. And you can just be along for the ride. I wrote many papers on that play too, and whenever I had a chance to like pick one Shakespearean play for this assignment, I'm like, okay, I'm writing about Twelfth Night again. So I also feel like sometimes the Shakespearean canon can fit that comfort for me as well.
Was that one of the ones you wrote that you got an award for? The Fool essay? Was that about Twelfth Night?
I did, yeah.
Look at your face.
They can't see my face, it's a podcast.
She's so proud.
I am so proud. Yes, if anyone is curious to read an essay from an undergrad student, I wrote a look at the fools in King Lear and in Twelfth Night. And I won a little award for it, which included money, which in college was so cool.
Yeah.
To get money for writing something. I was like, maybe we'll have to do Twelfth Night on the podcast sometime. We haven't done any Shakespeare.
Yeah. So part of what makes these books comforting as well, I think, is his writing style is very, very comical, but the plot is, and the characters are ultimately very like heartwarming, and he's got this really fascinating balance that like is really hard for me to wrap my head around, because we're doing a book next episode called Iowade on Top by Richard Iowade, where he uses a similar type of humor where, and I think it's a particularly English thing, where they put on this very hyperbolic kind of seriousness, right? Like they're so serious, like the most serious thing, but about very ridiculous or silly topics in order to make fun of the type of people who are super, super serious, so like super upper class people or academics or whatever it may be, right? Very self-important people. And so you make fun of that by taking on that affect, but to an extreme, and then talking about ridiculous things. And so it should come across as mockery, right? It should come across as satire. And I think Iowade does, but this one doesn't, and really took me by surprise. It's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, I've not yet read Iowade on Top, but I will before we record the next episode. But yeah, I found the humor, like I mentioned before, with the narrator's voice, like particularly great. I think Smith as a character also, I mean, he's just a little over the top. I love when he really gets into the groove of playing that he's this poet.
Mm-hmm.
And just like is so obnoxious. And so it's like kind of fun because in a way Smith and, you know, by proxy Wodehouse is making fun of poets by trying to be a very earnest poet.
Right.
And so it's kind of that like balance of like satire and earnestness. Well, not like completely saying poets are ridiculous, but he'll even like self-mockery of like, oh, of course you wouldn't want to go listen to me read for a whole hour or something like that, which is so funny how quickly he gets into it when he's like, oh shoot, I have to like actually know what this poetry is about. And he's like stuck on this phrase about a parabola and he's like, I don't understand it. And so to sound like smart and that he knows what he's talking about, he just like keeps referencing that line.
Oh my gosh.
And it's like a little inside joke every time it comes up because you know he has no clue what it means. And no one really knows what it means, but they're like, oh, it's poetry.
Even him explaining his name, like the P is silent, you know? Like it just is like so, it's so absurd. You're just like, what? But because he's like dead serious about it, you know what I mean? Like he won't, he never drops character. I think what it comes down to maybe is that like he really cares a lot about other people, but he doesn't really care. I don't know, he has this bizarre kind of set of his own personal rules, right? Where on the one hand, he's trying to look very distinguished and, you know, charming and whatever. But then he also does not care. Like, he throws... My favorite part in the whole book is when he's talking to Eve, and she's very frustrated because she needs to get the attention of the efficient Baxter. And he's doesn't have the time of day for her. And Psmith sees Baxter and the Earl of the castle up through the window in the library talking, and Smith and Eve are outside. And so he's like dead serious, super like genuinely wants to be helpful for her and really cares about her and is like, okay, I got this. The girl needs my help. And his solution is he's like, oh, I see Baxter's right there. Hang on. And he grabs a flower pot and throws it through the window. He breaks the window and it smashes into the library. And now there's broken glass everywhere. And Baxter is furious. And Smith like doesn't notice or something. It's like he doesn't notice he's angry or whatever, but he's like, ah, there he is. Now we have your attention. I was like dying laughing at that because he simultaneously cares so much about how he's perceived and yet doesn't at all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It's really, I don't know, something about that balance allows for that type of like very heartwarming but ridiculous humor.
I feel like there's some really like the bit you mentioned with the flower pots, like some really great physical humor, but then also just those like very exact descriptions that Wodehouse gives that are like almost too specific that they're funny. And like, I don't know, just like even out of context, I'm like, I don't know if these are super funny on their own, but like when you're reading, it just like sneaks up on you. Like in one part he writes, a depressing musty scent pervaded the place, as if a cheese had recently died there in painful circumstances. Like, I don't know what's funny about imagining that a cheese died, but like that smell, I'm like, oh, I can smell that. Cheese died in a painful way. Yeah. I understand that exactly. I didn't know I knew that, but I do know what that smells like, apparently.
But it's also, it's effective, but it also adds to that kind of melodrama that he's affecting, right?
Yeah.
Of like a cheese, not just like decaying or something and getting moldy, right?
It's not just a moldy cheese in the corner. It's like,
right.
Yeah.
No, but it's like this cheese was like murdered by his brother or something. You know what I mean? There's like this sense of melodrama to it. Oh, it's so good.
Or when he writes, a sound like 2 or 3 pigs feeding rather noisily in the middle of a thunderstorm interrupted his meditation. Like, there's no pigs and no thunderstorm around. Like, that's so specific just to, I believe that what was actually happening was like a couple people were like walking or talking nearby or falling or something like that. Like, but so specific. And I just want to read Woodehouse's, like, I imagine he had like a little journal that he would just like write down funny things he thought of.
Yeah.
And like find ways to use those descriptions. Because like, how do you just come up with that stuff?
I really would love if he had been a stand-up comic and had some jokes. Like, I think he would have been really good at it. I have two other favorite quotes that just are very silly. Well, one of them is just very silly, and I don't know why, but this makes me giggle. The noise which had acted so electrically upon the efficient Baxter had been a particularly noisy noise. Like, it's he's taking on this like super kind of serious tone, and then he describes a noise as a noisy noise. Right? Which is like the way a child might, like it's that kind of juxtaposition, I guess, is part of where the humor comes from. And then the same with part of Psmith's like ridiculousness and earnestness that makes him so absurdly charming. So he proposes to Eve, and she says no. And he starts giving all these like ridiculous reasons why he's a great catch. And they're like not at all great reasons. And then he approaches her again the next day, and he says, they're not talking about this at all, but then he brings it up. He says, by the way, returning to the subject we were discussing last night, I forgot to mention when asking you to marry me that I can do card tricks. He's like so sure that this is going to be the thing that convinces her, yes, this is the guy that I want. He's like so sure about it. And he's so genuinely like trying to win her over.
Interesting that you say that, because I kind of read this as he is trying to be, I mean, he's himself, but he's also so different than Freddie, who's just like, falling over himself to be like, I'm in love with you, Eve. I just, please marry me. Like, give me the time of day. Like, so earnest. And then for Smith, he's just like he knows, like, wooing her with praises of how beautiful or smart she is, or like trying to appeal to a sense of like romance isn't going to do it, but he knows he can make her laugh. And like, he wants to bring up the subject again. And so instead of being like super earnest and being like, can we talk about this again? Like, I really want to build a life with you, or something super like cliche. He is like bringing around the topic again, but in a like ridiculous way. I think it's his attempt at like, I want you to remember that I asked you to marry me, and I am serious about it enough to bring it up again, but I'm not Freddie, and I'm not going to like annoy you. I'm just going to make you like roll your eyes or laugh because I'm obnoxious. Or maybe he's building it up to be like, oh, he's gonna, pitch to me his great idea, and he's like, I can do card tricks. I'm a good catch.
So do you think he's self-aware then? Like, do you think he knows he's ridiculous?
I think so, a little bit, because I feel like he like purposefully hams it up when he's playing McTodd. Mm-hmm. But I think it's still like part of his personality in a way. I don't know.
That's interesting, because that now suggests to me, now I'm like rethinking the entire book, where I'm like, wait, is he doing this on purpose? Maybe this is just autistic Julia having no concept of like being able to put on a personality on purpose. But I'm like, oh, wait, so maybe he's trying to be annoying, or he's like kind of fed up with the way that serious people are, and so he's like trying to fluster them or something. I
don't know. So dear listener, write in. Let us know what you think.
Yeah.
How do you read Smith's humor? Is it earnest? Is it self-aware? Is it a little bit of both? Yeah.
Wow, man, this is really blowing my mind. I think I'm going to need to read another one.
Yeah, it makes me want to read some of the other novels with Smith to get a better sense of how he acts in other situations.
So, I guess we've got to do more research, which means it's time for some recommendations.
So, I think the obvious first recommendation is go read more Wodehouse. If you liked Smith as a character, go read the other books that include Smith. Other books that came to mind are, comedic novels by British men, I think is the theme here today.
Ones that I recommended to you, I would like to add.
I know. These are all Julia Clausen original recommendations that I'm now co-opting. But Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett is lovely. I think there's so many elements of Wodehouse's narrative voice, that I see echoed in Gaiman and Pratchett's writing as well. So many of my favorite parts of Good Omens were just like little humorous things the narrator said along the way. And also made me think of Funny Girl by Nick Hornby, though there are more mature and serious themes in Nick Hornby's novel than all, lighthearted fun times. But I think Funny Girl was another book that was very escapist for me. It's a really long one, but I literally sat on my couch like for an entire Saturday and read the whole thing, and it was a wonderful use of my time.
Yeah, another comedic novel by a British man. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You may be more familiar with it as a film, but it was a book first. The film is a fairly faithful adaptation in terms of tone as well as plot, but it's, again, that kind of British humor that I was talking about where, like, this is supposed to be like a guidebook, right? Where it takes itself very seriously. It's like, if you're going to make it in the galaxy, here's some things that you need to do. And it's very similar to like a Good Omens or something along those lines. So yeah. And then if you're looking for more comfort books, I mentioned Agatha Christie earlier, especially the early Poirot novels. So Mysterious Affair at Styles is the first one. The earlier Poirot novels where he and his friend Hastings are a lot younger and they bicker a lot, and it's very funny. So yeah, those are my two picks.
So now's the time of the show where Julie and I talk about other things that we enjoy that have nothing to do usually with the book we just read about.
Absolutely nothing.
I guess my first my first currently obsessed does kind of relate. The Storygraph is a really awesome online tool. They also have an app for your phone for just keeping track of all the books you read, writing reviews, connecting with other readers, participating in reading challenges. And I found this wonderful review of Leave It To Psmith by P Not Silent. That's the username. They review 5 stars. You do not review perfection, which I thought was humorous, though I did review this book and I think I gave it like 3.5 stars, but I tend to be very, very conservative with my star ratings. But yeah, if you are on Storygraph, I'd love to connect with you. You can find me at Victoria from Book Club. And you can also find the Book Club with Julia and Victoria reading challenge. So if you like to keep track of all the books you've read that we have covered on the podcast, you can go through, review the challenge, check off all the books that you have read, find links to those episodes. So at this point, we have a pretty extensive back catalog. I think there's 78 books in the challenge, because we had a couple episodes early on where we did 2 books in one. Mm-hmm. They were twofers. If you are wanting to kind of browse our back catalog, I think this is a fun way to do it and keep track of what you've read. My other currently obsessed is a restaurant here in Chicago that I've gone to twice now in like the past couple of weeks. It's called I Can't Believe It's Not Meat in Hyde Park, and it is the best like vegan comfort food I've ever had. Because a lot of like vegan and vegetarian food, I'm not vegan or vegetarian strictly, but like I do enjoy eating less meat sometimes. A lot of it is like, I don't know, here's a bowl of rice with some veggies on top, and you're just like, okay. Whereas like sometimes you just want a cheeseburger or like a chicken sandwich or a Philly cheesesteak. That's my favorite thing on their menu, which is also kind of a lie because it's the only thing I've tried on their menu. But I've had it twice, is their vegan or vegetarian, if you want dairy cheese, Philly cheesesteak. Oh my gosh, it's so good. But yeah, if you're in Chicago, it's in Hyde Park. I Can't Believe It's Not Meat. Go check it out.
Okay, it's been a month since we recorded, so I've got a few, guys. Sex Education Season 3 is on Netflix. It dropped like last night for me, but I'm very excited about it. I haven't watched it all yet, but I'm obsessed with the writers of that show. The film of part 1 of Dune, literally under my notes I just wrote Dune, because that's how I say it in my head. It premiered at Venice. It is now out in like Western Europe. It's not out in the US yet. Comes out in the US in a couple weeks, maybe a month. It's so good. Hans Zimmer did the music. Denis Villeneuve directed. That dream team came together for Blade Runner 2039. If you saw that, it looks incredible. It sounds incredible. I'm so stoked. It's 2.5 hours. So like, strap yourself in, you know, get ready to go. And it's only part 1. There's going to be another one. But it was so good. So go see it when it comes out near you. Halsey released an incredible album, which she produced with Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails. It is the best friggin' thing you've ever listened to in your life. It is called If I Can't Have Love, I Want Power. I've been listening to it constantly for the last month. It is so good. That sounded weird. It's very good. And then I moved to Belgium 2 weeks ago, a little 2.5 weeks ago, and it's been, you know, difficult because there's you know, shit that you gotta do when you move countries, and it's tough. And everything's in Dutch or French, and it's wild. I was very proud of myself. Yesterday, I built a sofa from IKEA and then met with the disability officer from my university, which I was not really expecting to do, and I wasn't even sure if there was anything that could do for me, and I was feeling very insecure about it and whatever, but I did it. I did the thing, and I don't know. I'm just very proud of myself. I feel like I've come a long way. My apartment is done. I don't know. Things are happening, and I'm kind of obsessed with myself. So
you're doing it. You're doing the things.
I'm doing the thing. Yeah.
Well, thanks for listening and all.
I'll say goodbye the way that I've learned people in Belgium say goodbye. They just say either dag or tot ziens, which either means day. It's like a shortened version of good day. Or tot ziens means see you later. So, tot ziens.
Tot ziens.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Book Club with Julia and Victoria. Chime in with your own thoughts and recommendations on Instagram at bookclubwithjv or through the contact form on our website, www.bookclubwithjv.com. Our website is also where you can find show notes for this episode, which include links to any of the recommendations we gave or other tidbits we mentioned. Make sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're currently listening, and leave us a 5-star review on Apple while you're there. This episode was co-hosted and produced by myself, Victoria Bruick, along with Julia Clausen. Our music is composed by Greg Bruick. Our logo was designed by Gabby Fedland, and Rebecca Gesney is our project manager. We'll catch you all on our next episode. Happy reading!